Welcome, Drink with James, episode 164. Listen, y'all, I broke my tooth in half about 10 minutes before we started filming this. I guess technically that's not true because I'm not actually sure it's my tooth. It could be a cap. I think if you've been watching the show for a long time, you've probably heard me talk about I was a wrestler in high school. And, you know, like all things, I took it incredibly seriously. And I was determined to win the state championship in the 112-pound weight class, which was fine when I decided to wrestle 112 pounds in May. And then by the time it was December, towards the end of the season, I had grown 5 inches. So I was 5'10", 110 pounds. And I ended up, after the season, because I guess if you starve yourself, you lose the enamel of your teeth. So I had 28 cavities after that season, and I had to get, 2 of my teeth fell out during wrestling matches, and then I had to get 2 or 3 more pulled. I've got, root canals on most of my teeth, and I don't even know how many of my teeth are real anymore. So anyway, I broke one in half eating a pretzel chip, which, is not a super offensive thing. It's not like I was eating a Laffy Taffy or rock candy or something. Look, I'm pushing through it though. Half a tooth. Look, I'm pushing through it. I was feeling pretty good until this happened, about life in general, about my look, which is, a little bit different today. It's probably, hopefully, one of the last hot days in New York. I think it's probably the last 90-degree day for a while. I say that, but global warming, who knows? Christmas could be 90 degrees. But this is a vintage shirt I got in Mexico City. Did I tell that story about that store in Mexico City?
I don't think so.
This was a really interesting marketing tactic from this store, this vintage store in Mexico City. It was called Good Folk Vintage. And I was, lucky enough to be staying with our friends at the Four Seasons down in Mexico, and I was there for meetings. And I had tagged the Four Seasons, and I got a DM from someone on Instagram that says, "Hey, I work at this store called Good Folk Vintage. I see you're in town. We'd love to have you come by the store, and I'll hook you up with a discount if you show this DM." Now, funny enough, I'd already gone to the store and I already spent like $300, so that was kind of annoying. And I DM'd the person back. I was like, haha, I actually was in there today. Love the shop, whatever. And then the next day, the colleague I was with, Grace, posted a photo, tagged the Four Seasons, and she got a DM from a different person that worked there. And then I posted another photo and I got a different DM from a person that worked there, and realized that they must have a certain group of hotels that they watch, and anyone that tags a photo, they make their employees create Instagram accounts that are their name _ Good Folk Vintage. And they just DM people and say that. But what was funny is when I got the DM, I felt very special. I was like, oh gosh, this is amazing. I just land in Mexico City, and some random person that works at this vintage store happens to follow me, because when I clicked through to their profile, which they had filled with real photos, I saw they were following me. So I thought not that I'm part of this marketing ploy. I thought instead that they had already been following me, seen I was in town, and reached out and asked me to come to the store. Wasn't the case. They just literally reach out to everyone. But it was I thought it was pretty effective. And what made more sense is when I went into the shop, the first thing they were just "Hi, welcome, how you doing? How'd you hear about us?" And I was just oh, I think I just looked up hipster vintage store. And they're wrote that down. So they were tracking how this is working. It was really interesting. And I wish them the best, and I'm pleased with my polyester polka dot dress shirt from the 1970s, and that is a little story on how small businesses use Instagram to market themselves. I hope you enjoyed it. Should we move on? So question number 1 is, does engagement fall during New York Fashion Week? I'm going to caveat that by saying nobody asked that question. But I did mention in last week's episode that we were going to do a study on engagement during Fashion Week, and that my theory, just shot in the dark, was that engagement would fall. We did find that to be the case. If you haven't seen on 4's Instagram, we're going to publish these results for our little study that we did right today. So it'll be a couple days back. If you haven't seen it, you can dive more into it there. I'm sure they'll explain it more thoroughly. But what was interesting is, so we took anyone that mentioned hashtag New York Fashion Week or mentioned New York Fashion Week. We've had 1,400 influencers. We looked at their engagement in the month leading up to Fashion Week, during Fashion Week, month after Fashion Week. And what was really interesting is that if you look at their engagement in the weeks leading up to Fashion Week to during Fashion Week, engagement fell over 25%. And it really doesn't rebound in the month after. Now, it could be that people are going and doing all the different cities, but I feel pretty confident saying that engagement falls on a whole for those influencers who are talking about Fashion Week. Now, there's more to this story than just, oh, you shouldn't talk about Fashion Week. Another interesting thing was, of those 1,400 influencers, they were publishing on average about, what was it? It was like 7,000 posts a week. And during Fashion Week, they were publishing 10,000 posts. So I think the fall in engagement has as much to do with posting quite a bit more as it does with people not connecting with it. And so if you're worried about your engagement during Fashion Week and you're looking at these numbers and trying to find a takeaway, my takeaway would be that you should be posting less, or just don't ramp up the frequency of your posting as much as you might do. Now, you might not care, which is also totally fine. We've had a few conversations recently with influencers who say they just no longer really care about engagement. And maybe you want to post what you want to post, go crazy. But the data is saying pretty strongly that for those influencers who go to Fashion Week and cover it, your engagement is going to fall by at least 25%. And you kind of know how the algorithm works. It can be hard to get that back. And I think that's maybe what we're seeing in the fact that the engagement doesn't rebound, is that once your engagement slips, it can be hard to turn that around consistently. So you could put yourself in a hole for months to come if you bomb your audience too much and bore them with your Fashion Week content. So pay attention to that or don't. I think it's another thing, next year we would like to do a study on Insta Stories and see how much drop-off there is, because I find the Insta Stories to be quite a bit more boring and mind-numbing and repetitive than the Instagram posts. But the constant stories of finales and the shows is fairly, I think, boring to most people. Really exciting if you're there, but for most people, pretty fucking boring. So consider that. You guys know, listen, I don't script these things, okay? I don't know what I'm gonna say until it comes out of my mouth, and often that's not a good thing. And I think one of the things that's been really great about having the show and being public about this stuff, right? And having to sit here for 30 minutes a week and talk about how I feel about different things and try and explain it, is that a lot of times I'm wrong, and a lot of times I get called out on that, and I personally look at that as a huge place to learn, and I try and take lessons from that. And so recently, right after we published last week's episode with the segment on Popeyes and Chick-fil-A and the chicken sandwich feud, Brittany from A Little Brit of Fun, she thought that my not mentioning Black Twitter's role in kind of driving this conversation and driving this into pop culture consciousness was a big misstep. And I totally agreed, and just reached out to her and said, hey, would you be willing to do 5 minutes on the show and have us talk through that? So I am excited to be able to kick it over to my conversation with Brittany to rehash what happened with Popeyes and Chick-fil-A. So we have Brittany here from A Little Bit of Fun. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So we published Drink with James a couple days ago, and I saw you post your Insta story and say that you felt like any kind of conversation around the Popeyes Chick-fil-A controversy and the amazing success that Popeyes has had, that left out Black Twitter was not really complete. And I thought it was totally valid, and reached out and asked for you to do this. And here we are a couple days later. So again, thanks for accepting. And I think first, like, just for a little context, because it's kind of interesting. I was in Bangladesh when the Popeye stuff was happening, and so when they said they wanted to talk about it on the show, I just read up online, and I think that's probably also part of the problem, is it's not like the articles I read were not in any way talking about Black Twitter. So for people who heard that phrase before, I've heard people talk about Black Twitter. Just kind of explain first, like, at the most basic, when someone says, is talking about that, what are they talking about?
So it's really just almost like an online community on Twitter full of Black people. It's very basic when you say it like that, but really you get your activism, you get updates on things that are happening in the Black community, you get meme culture, you get all these things that are very specific to Black culture. And so, like, with that sandwich, I had been sort of seeing people talk about that sandwich for a solid 3 weeks before it exploded. And it's really just a place where people have fun, and it's almost like a little cookout, but on Twitter, which is, if you were in the Black culture, you know what I mean by that. But it's really just a great way for people to sort of relate to each other and have community on Twitter.
And having talked to a few people and heard, the term kind of thrown around, from what I understand, the kind of velocity in which things spread through Black Twitter is pretty, like, things spread really, really quickly, right? And then that collective voice is incredibly powerful.
Yes, 100%. And you see it with all sorts of things, like everyone talking about Hot Girl Summer. I mean, that's from Megan Thee Stallion, who's a Houston rapper that basically blew up through a couple of avenues, but Black Twitter really sort of latched on to that. And you really see them sort of highlight these cultural things that a lot of times become almost pop culture phenomenons. But then you have people writing about them and sort of leaving that piece out of it.
Yeah. And it was interesting when you kind of mentioned that on Instagram, and I went back and re-looked at the articles I had read about it. And as I said, there's really no mention of it. And do you find in general that that's the case, that, Black Twitter is kind of helping to shape and push these things into, like, cultural consciousness, and then it gets co-opted by maybe the rest of Twitter and then the rest of the internet, and Black Twitter's role in that is pretty much scrubbed?
Yes. And I mean, I can't tell you the number of threads I've seen on Twitter that then I see in, XYZ news article or social site, where it's almost as if writers or people that even manage, like, brands on social media sort of watch what Black Twitter is talking about, and then sort of translate that into clicks and things for them, but sort of leave Black Twitter completely out of it. And I mean, you already have a group that's marginalized and sort of made their own avenue and place to sort of be together and talk about things they enjoy. So it's a bit disheartening when you see people latch onto those things, but then completely erase the group out of it.
Yeah. And, I think I always try and use, like, these situations where I say something that is wrong and am corrected by someone as a way to kind of listen and get educated. and for me to understand the internet a little bit better and understand culture and how this stuff starts. Is there anything like, for the industry at large, that, you wish was better understood or better recognized? And how can, for someone like my exact situation of researching something like this, like the Popeye sandwich, and it not being mentioned in articles that it should have been, is there anything people who are sitting in the kind of seat of privilege, such as myself as a white man, can do to kind of understand and recognize this community more?
I think sometimes it can be something as simple as just going to sort of look a little bit past your standard set of articles that you might find. Specifically in this scenario, like people knew there was sort of a talk about it on social media. They knew the brands were sort of having their jokes and memes on Twitter. And just a quick search, and you sort of would have started to find more and more things like that. But I understand that if you don't have a concept of something like Black Twitter, you're not going to know to go look for that. And I think on a broader scale, in influencer marketing, writing, any kind of job or avenue like that, you need people that are working for you and working in these places that are sort of tied to these communities. If you have more diversity in staff in any number of scenarios, you're going to have more people that sort of could have said, oh, well, if people are writing these articles, someone could have said, well, this all started on Black Twitter a month ago. Right. So I think there's a larger problem at hand, and I don't expect, everyone to sort of know what Black Twitter is. I mentioned it on Instagram and people were like, what are you talking about? But I think it's just more of, you have to sort of have diverse people around you, and then be responsible a little bit for the work and educating yourself a little bit as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's been like, for me, such a big like part of getting, having more conversations like this is the realization that, diversity does need to start like in the boardroom, right? And as we are, building campaigns, and it's something that, 18 months ago, we looked at our company and said, oh, wait, we are not nearly diverse enough. And how can we expect to market to a community if we don't have people on our staff helping to build the campaigns who are part of that community?
Exactly.
And made a concerted effort to change that, and the company is much better for it, but we could continue to do even better. And I think for the influencers and brands that are watching this, it's a great reminder that, that diversity like does need to start from ideation, from the boardroom, from your own staff,
right?
And the kind of just like, token, oh, we need to have X amount of this campaign be diverse. It's just not enough, right?
Yeah, I really hate that. I hate pandering. And I think that people sometimes forget diversity looks like all kinds of people, diversity in bodies, diversity in, ethnicity, like lifestyle, every sort of branch of that tree. And I think just once you're sort of organically including those people in whatever it is you do, you will start to be tied to these other communities that you can market to, or you can acknowledge in a way that doesn't feel like you're pandering, or doesn't sort of leaving them out of something. And so my hope is to sort of see more of that from people.
Yeah. Well, that is, I think, a good place to call it. Thank you so much. For everyone watching this, tell a bit about like, what are you covering on your Instagram generally?
So I do a little bit of everything. I talk a lot about social issues. I tried the whole influencer thing and then on it. But I do have a blog, a littlebitofun.com, and I love it. And I put a lot of my work into it. So I would love it if people would check that out. But I mean, if you're into random commentary on everything from politics to Real Housewives, I might be the Instagram account for you.
Okay, so we're going to put a link to your account and to your blog in the description here on the YouTube, so you guys should definitely click on that. And I think a reminder to everyone to call shit out when you see it and it's wrong, because
Yes.
I have been so enriched, like in having people call me out and being able to have these conversations. So if you're out there and you're seeing shit that you think, hey, that is wrong, don't be afraid to call people out, right?
Right. And also, because you taught me a lesson that I needed a reminder on too. When people call you out and it feels valid, be open to it. Because I think sometimes we close ourselves off to that. And that's the only way you sort of grow and do better.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. And I will release you from our Skype call.
Okay. Bye.
Question number 2 is, I've heard that Instagram is listening to your conversations and serving ads. Is that true? Listen, this is amazing. I hear this once a week from people who say, oh, I was just with my friend and I was talking about blank brand. And then I opened my Instagram and boom, there was an ad for that. They have to be listening to me. And it's like smart adults with like functioning brains believe this to be true. They believe that Instagram is listening to your conversations and serving ads. Now, there's a lot of reasons that that's insane. I'm generally not a believer in conspiracy theories because, especially today, it would be so difficult to cover that up. There's just no way that Instagram could be spying on 3.4 billion people and then using that data and going to brands and telling them, hey, we have advertising and we can target people based on their conversations, and that thousands and thousands of brands and thousands of Facebook employees who know this secret, nobody has leaked any information about it. That is obviously not possible. The other thing is that Facebook has a $55 billion a year advertising business, and if this were true, I assume the FTC would just not allow them to advertise anymore. It would ruin their business, and how could it be worth $55 billion to listen to your fucking inane conversations and serve you ads? The greater truth is a few things. One, you're super predictable, and like it's not that hard for a brand to look at the data that they do get, to look at the things that you like and the things you look at and the websites you go to and build a profile and guess what you're going to like. And the more interesting thing is kind of how recognition works in advertising. And I think what is happening when you have that phenomenon, when you feel like I was just talking about this and I saw an ad, was just that you were just talking about it. And then you saw an ad that you've probably seen 20 times. But because you just talked about the brand, that triggers something in your brain to say, oh my gosh, I was just talking about this, and you recognize the ad. And then, a day later you see an influencer post about it, you recognize that. And then your friend is at drinks and they're talking about this thing they bought from this brand, and you recognize that. And then you're like, oh my God, I'm hearing this everywhere. But you're really not hearing it more than you used to. It's just that you are conditioned to recognize it more. I know like when I got a Leica camera, I now see Leicas everywhere, because I'm looking for them, because I know what they look like and I'm passionate about the brand now. And so I'm just so much more likely to notice a Leica than I used to be. So I see them every day. Whereas if you asked me a year ago, how often do you see a Leica? I'd say I don't actually see Leicas every day. I probably see one a week, right? If you had asked me a year ago, I probably would have said I see a Leica once every couple months, maybe. Maybe I see 5 people a year with them. But I was seeing just as many, probably 50, 60 people a year. It's just that I wasn't conditioned to recognize it. And I wrote an email to brands today about this and said that what I think influencers, one thing that is so powerful about influencer marketing is that because you guys already have the trust with your audience, because they listen to what you say, you are able to get that brand to stick in their brain so the next time an ad comes up, they actually recognize it. And that ad is so much more effective. There's really no actionable point here for you guys, but I do think that understanding psychology, understanding the way our brains work is really important, especially if your job is changing people's minds and influencing them. And so in your own behavior, like, think about that, and when you feel yourself noticing a brand or whatever it might be, more often than you did before, try and step back and deconstruct what brought you there and what is making you recognize that, because that is, again, such a powerful thing that we can do as an industry to drive the efficacy of advertising. Question number 3. Are there any takeaways from Kacey Musgraves posting about Tom's 1-hour photo in LA? So for those of you who haven't seen this, weird, but Kacey Musgraves went to this 1-hour photo shop, got some like amazing kind of cheesy photos made and printed and posted them to her Instagram, and basically said, hey, talk to the owner of this business. They have struggled when the world moved to digital. I went in, had a really good time shooting with him. I loved the photos. If you guys are in the area, it would be amazing if you could go support them. And in general, I think she was like, there's so many of these businesses, and if you can, going in and spending $5 with them rather than Amazon priming it or working with some behemoth is a small thing you can do to support your community. I think the response has been overwhelming. People are lining up to get their photos taken. It's totally kind of revitalized their business. It's a big feel-good story, I think, for Kacey and for everyone involved. And I think as an influencer, obviously she is sitting at hundreds of thousands of likes on these photos, and she has, I don't know how many followers, but more than you probably do if you're watching this show. But I do think it speaks to, when we were talking about a few weeks ago using your feed for good, right? And the charity trip I did in Bangladesh, right? And that's a hard thing to do. Just getting the visas was incredibly difficult. It's something that no individual could just do. Like, if you were like, I'm going to Bangladesh, I don't even know that would be possible. But there are smaller things that you can do, right? You can highlight a local business in your neighborhood. Again, Kacey Musgraves took her platform and did something really fun with it. And is it gonna change this guy's life forever? No. It'll be a spike for a week, a month, a few months. If that business is going to close, that business is going to close. One Instagram post is not going to change that. But in the short term, it certainly is helping, and it's giving them a chance. And I think that as the space has grown and as we focus more and more on money, I think you lose that thing that is so fun about having a platform, which is being able to use it to highlight people that you think are doing awesome things. And bring them some attention. It's so hard to run a business. You guys know, you've heard me talk about that. It's so hard. And when somebody goes out on a limb and does something to support you and try and bring awareness to the thing that you're doing, you don't forget it. Tim, I said Tim's putting a movie out, right? And I think when we were talking about it, in the run-up to him kind of launching this film, I was like, you're definitely going to notice the friends that show up with their credit card versus the ones that don't. And it means a lot when somebody supports the thing you're doing with money or time or throws some attention at it, because for you it's everything, and you're looking at it as a business owner being like, this is a small thing somebody could do. Why are they not doing it? That's if it's your friends. But I think as an influencer, thinking about that power, and thinking about your ability to, not make national news like Kacey Musgraves did, but if you get 10 more customers to go to a local business in the next month, that's 10 customers, that's real money. that actually can make a difference. So I think it's really fun. I think it's a fun story about the power of Instagram and social and what a following can do for someone. And I encourage all of you to go find weird, small, cool businesses in your neighborhood, talk about them, drive people to them, get them to shop there, find new brands and talk about those. You can make your money in other ways, but that's probably the reason you got into this in the first place anyway, was to help and talk about cool brands and businesses that are doing interesting things. So get back to that and listen to Kacey's Musgraves last album, because it was an absolute banger end to end. That is all. Look, I am late to an event. Fashion Week is upon us, so I'm going to go ruin my engagement and talk about it. Bye.